This mower is a VICTA 560 Mulchmaster Pro. 560 is its overall cutting diameter, which is 560 millimeters, which is basically just under 22 inches. I've used these commercially for about 7 years now. This one being the latest model, which is just under 2 years old. So it's about time that I do a couple of modifications to it, and also particular things that are needed, especially in winter months when it's raining and quite muddy. These are just basically general maintenance to keep the mower running. So what I'm showing you here is I've just taken the wheel off, and I've recently replaced the wheel seal inside. They just come off quite easily and can be put back on. I normally keep an eye on these and replace them when necessary. Mowing every day commercially, they can last anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, depending on the weather conditions. But over winter time, they're crucial in order to keep the mud and grit from entering into that part, which is going to cause excessive premature wear of the parts. Also, water will get into the bearings, and half the reason why I'm doing this today is because water and mud's got into the back of the bearing, which is the drive bearing. So what I'm doing is there's a split pin on this cog, and I'm just putting a piece of wood underneath there to support it, because if you drive the pin out without supporting that, you can bend the drive shaft, and once you've bent the drive shaft, that's it, you need to buy a new gearbox. So once you have it supported on a piece of 4x2, you can see on that previous clip, you have to align, there's the groove, align the top of the split pin to be 90 degrees pointing upwards. So then you want to get a special tool that you can either make, or otherwise you can buy a split pin punch set from Repco. So I had a special tool which I had previously made, but it had worn out, so I popped up to Repco and bought a roll pin punch set. So here I am, just taking the new ones out of the packet. The roll pins are about 2mm, and so you use a 2mm to knock it out, and then you use a 3mm in order to resync it in. So by turning the it clockwise, the axle won't spin. So in order to align the roll pin in the correct point to knock it out, you need to go anti-clockwise to turn it to the right position, and then turn it clockwise in order to not turn the axle to get the alignment. Might take a bit of practice the first time, and then you need to remember to put it on top of the piece of 4x2. So once you tap it out, you can use about moderate force to tap it out, and you may need to put some oil in there or some WD-40 just to help knock it out. The pin will end up knocking into the piece of 4x2, so just carry on until eventually it's knocked right down into the piece of 4x2, and that should be fine. This particular mower I've had, I haven't had to do this yet, and I haven't actually had to remove these cogs, and I've had no spring failures inside the cog, which is pretty good. So here I am, the roll pin's actually been knocked into the piece of wood. So I was hoping that it would just very carefully pull off, but unfortunately I was in for a bit more of a work. With this one in particular, it had actually rusted in really badly, so I have to go through the process now of showing how to get this particular cog off the axle. So I'm putting some WD-40 on there. I'm trying to dissolve any rust and moisture that's in there. I'm actually just very lightly tapping, trying to displace it. I'm only using very light force here. When I put the screwdriver in there, I know that the back bearing is actually pretty much disintegrated, so I'm actually tapping lightly, but then when I put a screwdriver in there, I'm actually twisting the screwdriver, which is making sure that I don't bend the back plate, because the last thing I want to do is then bend the back plate or damage anything to do with the back plate. So having used these mowers for many years, I can diagnose these issues that arise. Usually they have symptoms, and when these particular things happen with the mower, you can tell that the maintenance issues have arisen and you need to spend some time working on the mower. So usually it comes with a certain amount of use and a certain period of time, so it can happen from anywhere from first 6 months to up to a year and a half to 2 years, depending. This particular thing was you can when the axle bearings go, you tend to have the cog come away from the inner cogs of the wheel, so you'll get a very fast vibration, sort of the noise that a cog would make if it wasn't quite meshing correctly. So it's more like a sort of noise inside the wheel, and also if you turn the mower from one side to the other, you get this without the drive engaged. So when you're actually pushing the mower around and loading the mower, you can actually hear this more inside the wheel. So basically, once this happens, you've got to stop mowing as soon as possible, otherwise you'll destroy all the cogs, which are only plastic inside the wheel, and then you'd be in for $140 new wheel. So therefore, this happens because mud and grit and water gets into the bearing, strips the bearing out, and the bearing will just disintegrate in the back. This has also got a bit of play in the axle. Play is just generally depending on what type of gearbox the mower has in it. There's various different gearboxes that these mowers come out with, some being the full aluminium and some being the plastic replacement. This one particular is the latest model, and it's a French gearbox, I've been told. So therefore, when you're working on this particular one, I've noticed there's a bit of play, so I'll also show you how you can shim up between the cog to try and remove some of this play within the gearbox. So I haven't had much luck at this point in time with getting it off. It's completely welded, seized on there. So I'm just tipping the mower up now, trying to get some oil right in there. And also I'll get the heat gun out and I'll apply some heat to that and try and really heat it up really hot to remove this. So usually there isn't this much trouble trying to get the cog off. It's more of a rarity. Usually it will come off quite easily and we'll just pull off. It's probably the fact that I've actually this is the first time I've done it on this particular mower. My old mower I had, which I was in service for about 4 years plus, which I still have, which is down on the ground there. That's actually going to be fully rebuilt, and I'll probably do a video on rebuilding that. The gearbox in that is actually still functioning fine, so that's probably a record for a VICTA gearbox used commercially, but there's a few tricks that you can do to keep them alive. Now here I am putting a lot of heat in. You could use a butane torch, but you just have to be really careful not to overheat, because the heat will go straight into the gearbox and other parts, and you don't want to do damage to that gearbox. So heat gun still gets very hot, but then you can sort of maybe maintain the temperature. So I'm putting a little bit more into the cog now, just a little bit more, just trying to and I'm actually getting a little bit of progress now. I'm moving it down a little bit, so I am going the opposite direction, but sometimes in order to displace that rust and that by driving it down, you're actually loosening it off. So now I'm just using 2 screwdrivers to very carefully leverage up the cog. So I'm not exerting too much force. I'm sort of just using enough, just enough to slightly move it. So it is moving now. So I have actually removed these cogs before to replace the springs inside the cog, which do break, which is a serviceable part. So I've done this on the side of the road before in the pouring rain within 10 minutes. So I'm actually using a twisting upwards motion now, so I'm twisting the screwdrivers and lifting up, remembering not to bend the back plate. So it's coming up now. There you go, and you can see all the steam from the oil and the smoke burning away there, so it was pretty hot. So you can see the bearing, the outer shells there, and all the little ball bearings have completely come out. So that bearing was absolutely disintegrated. So I'm just very carefully taking out all the little ball bearings, making sure I get absolutely every single one, because the last thing you want is one of those getting in between the cogs and the wheel. And then what will happen is it will push the ball bearings into the plastic of the wheel, and therefore damage the cogs and the wheel. To it. So I just got a rag and a degreaser and just cleaning it out. Now I'm getting the shim and the new bearing. Now the shim's just basically a washer, and the washer is the size smaller than the bearing, with an inside diameter bigger than the axle. So you can see here there's a bit of play upwards and downwards or in and out from the gearbox. So basically I just went to the hardware shop and got some washers. They're about 20 cents each. Just making sure that they're smaller than the bearing to fit inside that little part where the bearing sits, and then obviously inside diameter is bigger than the actual axle. So here I am, I've put it all back together. The spring inside was good, so therefore I've just put it back on with a little bit of WD-40 and using a 3mm roll pin punch to lightly tap it back in, keeping in mind that I've put it back on the piece of 4x2 to support it. So I did do the other side. The other side came off easily without any issues, so it's always best once one side is gone to do the other at the same time. It's like doing your brakes on your car. You wouldn't just replace one side and not the other. It would be pointless. So the other one was not as bad, but it was on its way out. So you just want to make sure that you tap the roll pin down flat, and you can see, and then you need to check that the rotation clockwise and then anti-clockwise, which turns the axle. Then once that's good, just make sure you've got the wheel bearing on the shaft, and you need to give the wheel a really good clean. Make sure there's no debris inside, and it's absolutely spotless. So I used compressed air to blow all the grit and dust out. Make sure you wear safety glasses if you're doing that, and also a dust mask is always good. There's a little shim that you can get to put, once you put the wheel on, you put a little plastic shim on before you put the clip to clip the wheel on, and that can actually help push the wheel further in towards the cog as well. And towards the back plate, which helps the overall movement of the wheel. So this is just a VICTA 560 gearbox, one of the earlier aluminium ones. They're very simple, not a lot to them. They use a what would you probably call a centrifugal friction clutch. There's a little brass cog in the inside, with two angled clutches in there that push into that. One side's actually locked with a split pin, the other is free with movement, and then there's a lever arm that once you've got the opposite movement of the direction of the, and then you've got the lever arm that pulls on that, it will actually put a lot of force into that, which causes the friction for the clutch in there. There are little roller bearings also in there, which helps, but this one's one of the earlier replacement plastic type. Both of these I actually got as sort of samples because they were damaged, and I just wanted to pull them apart and have a look at them, which was quite interesting. So the next part of the video is basically I'm re-greasing the inside of the gearbox. The gearboxes come with oil in them in factory, but they will dry out over time, depending on the amount of use and in the climates. So the oil will evaporate out, or either burn off in time. So this can happen within anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So what I want to do is I want to drill a little hole into the bottom of the gearbox. As you can see there, I've drilled out the rivets and taken the back which is a rubber sort of cover off the back there. Some people will take that off straight away. They're quite long from factory. The first thing you want to do when you get a Victa is probably cut that off anyway. It's a pointless design, and it actually gets in the way when you want to try and pull the mower backwards. So it will split very quickly in time as well. So here I am, I'm just tapping a pilot hole into the gearbox. So the bottom part's aluminium on these ones, and the top part's plastic. If you tap and thread a screw into a plastic part of the gearbox, it's not going to be very sturdy, and it's going to strip out the threads, and it's not going to be very useful for very long. So I've decided, seeing I'm going to be re-greasing it and not re-oiling it, I'm actually going to put it down at the bottom. So I've done a pilot hole, and now I'm just using the drill bit to very carefully, slowly. Now I've got my hand in that position because I'm actually stopping the drill from just going straight into the gearbox and damaging the cogs. I'm actually pushing with my hand braced against the drill, so therefore it won't push in. I'm exerting as much force back on the drill as I am pushing into the gearbox, as you can see. So when I drilled the hole, I drilled it to about 0.5 to 1 mil smaller than the tap size, and the tap matches the thread of the grease nipple that I'm going to be putting into it. Now I've done a gearbox previous, and I've drilled into the top, and I've actually threaded in a bolt, a very small little bolt, which had a washer on, which acted as sort of like a stop or a bung for the top, and then I've actually used a syringe to fill oil, but I found that evaporated out quite quickly. So the second time I've done this, I've actually converted to using a grease nipple. So I've put some oil on the tap here, and I'm just very carefully making sure I get it in as very straight as possible to the gearbox casing, and I'm just very carefully tapping it in. So I think in this particular instance I used a drill bit which was 1 mil smaller than the tap. So I don't want to go in too far. I've sort of judged how thick the casing is, so I just want to go in enough, very carefully, and not go in too far. But on this particular gearbox, this is the latest model, which is a 2018 VICTA. This is a French gearbox, so this is the first time I've ever actually done it to this particular gearbox model. So here I am, I'm just double checking that I haven't caused any damage and the gearbox is still functioning as it should. So by oiling the tap, it's any metal filings come off on the tap and not in the gearbox, and also just cleaning it up there. So it's very important to use a high strength or medium strength Loctite. So I'm just putting a little bit of high strength Loctite onto the thread, just a very light small bit onto the thread of the grease nipple. Now I'm using an angled grease nipple just basically because it's easier when you're trying to re-grease. You can use just a standard one if you want, but you just got to make sure when you tap it in you leave enough room around the outside from any particular part of the gearbox. There might be sort of the angled lip of the gearbox, just so you got enough room diameter to fit the grease gun onto it. So I'm just hand tightening it just to make sure I've got the thread on so I don't thread it. So I'm just doing it up, and then I'll just very, very, very carefully nip it up with a spanner. Remembering I'm putting brass or steel into aluminium, so even aluminium, that thinner casting, you could probably very easily thread it. So you just got to use your common sense. That's why I'm using super strength Loctite. So I'm just using high temperature So you want to completely fill the gearbox full of grease. There's quite a lot of capacity inside the gearbox. This will heat up and actually some will come out and force its way out through between the axle and the seals and stuff after the first couple of uses after doing this. But that's totally fine. You just want to wipe all that clear, take a rag with you when you're mowing and turn it off. The machine off, so you don't catch your fingers in the any moving parts, and just give it a wipe down around the gearbox and the axle. So So now you've done this modification, you should get another 2 to 3 years out of your gearbox easily. And then every so often you just want to maybe pump some more grease in there. I would also suggest that you keep an eye on the wheel seals and also the movement of the rear axle. Usually also after doing these maintenance things and this gearbox modification, you may experience a little bit more slip from when you engage the transmission. The drive may seem a little bit laboured or slow on engagement, and you may find some slip. This is totally fine. This will go within a couple of days to a week. It's usually some of the excess oil, WD-40, inside the hub and on the cog and the spring. This will burn off and dry out, which is fine. And or also it could be just the grease levels in the gearbox. It takes a bit of time for it to sort of find its way into the correct bits inside the gearbox, and also sort of move about in the gearbox and cover everything correctly. But I found that this will go back and you'll have a very strong, grippy gearbox that will pull you up the hill, no probs, after doing this within about a week. Well, thanks for watching. I'll be posting more videos on the VICTA 560 and also complete rebuild of the other VICTA 560 in the future. That will be replacing the complete rear axle, bushes, etc. Thanks for watching.